Good afternoon and welcome to a webinar hosted by United Charitable Programs. My name is Stephanie and I'll be today's moderator. I'll be introducing today's presenter as well as reading off any questions that you may have at the end of this presentation. This webinar will update you on UCP's new domestic and international gifting policy. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a few webinar housekeeping items. All attendees at this webinar will be muted. If you have any questions, simply type them into the comment field located on the control panel to the right of your screen. They will then be answered at the end of the presentation. Also, today's presentation will be recorded and will be available online on our website at unitedcharitableprograms.org under our Resources tab. UCP's new charitable gifting policy, how the changes affect your program and its activities, will be presented by Katie Kern, the Director of Program Administration here at United Charitable Programs. Katie manages over 700 different charitable programs within our sponsorship and will be your main point of contact throughout the run of your program here at UCP. She's able to answer many of the questions you have on various UCP policies and procedures. Now let's welcome Katie.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. This is Katie Kern. Again, I'm the Director of Program Administration here at UCP. And we're going to be going over UCP's new charitable gifting policy, as well as how it affects your program and how you donate overseas and domestically. We do have a half-hour schedule for this program, and I know everyone's time is very valuable, so I'd like to try and keep it within that time frame. But we have built in some time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions or to address any concerns that you may have. Just a quick overview about what we'll be talking about. We're going to talk about UCP's fiscal sponsorship responsibilities, meaning how we're responsible for your program to make sure that it's following the various rules and regulations as they come out from Congress or from the IRS. Our new charitable gift recommendation policy in its totality. Then we're going to talk about domestic gifts, foreign grants, and then how to submit the various forms and how we process the donations and grants here in our offices. As your fiscal sponsor, UCP is responsible for staying abreast of any regulation or legislative changes that affect our programs and updating our policy to reflect those changes. And basically that means that we want to make sure that we're in good standing with the IRS or the different laws or legislation or executive orders out there to make sure that what our programs are doing and what we're doing ourselves is all within those regulations. Our new charitable gift recommendation policy reflects the tightening of regulations and strictures in IRS 501c3 code and regulations, OFAC regulations, which stands for Office of Foreign Asset Control, executive orders from the executive branch of the government, legislation and legal precedents, as well as industry best practices. In addition to those things, we've also used our experience and institutional knowledge that we have gained over the years as a fiscal sponsor in regards to what works effectively and efficiently, what we can maintain sufficient oversight over, and how to make sure that we're not being too unduly burdensome to our programs with the various forms or policies. Our charitable gift recommendation policy was put out there to support qualified charitable organizations through grants recommended by our donor-advised funds and our fiscally sponsored programs. The guidelines that must be followed when these gifts are made both domestically and internationally are all outlined in this policy. For domestic gifts, there are additional forms, and for international gifts, there are additional forms. But this policy will tell you exactly what you need to know on how to make those donations or grants. For domestic gift, we use the Charitable Gift Recommendation Form in order for our programs or donor-advised funds to request a gift to a U.S.-based 501c3. For international grants, we have 3 forms that would be used when requesting an organization to be vetted or funds to be sent out, and how to report those funds. And we use the Foreign Grant Application Form, the Grant Usage Report, and the Foreign Grant Request Form. And we're going to talk about all these forms in more detail later on in the presentation. For domestic gifts, there's three major types that we're going to talk about today. One are gifts to 501c3 organizations, meaning other U.S.-based public charities, churches, and governmental institutions. For a gift to a 501c3 organization in the United States, we do require that you complete a charitable gift recommendation form. Now this takes the place of the code 5100 or 5100 on our regular disbursement request form. And that is, we're going to take that code away from that form because there are additional information that we need to know in case the IRS or an auditor ever requested of us, such as what the purpose of the proposed gift is or how the organization was selected. But we're going to talk about that form in a moment. We do need a copy of the IRS determination letter or the tax identification number. And those can abbreviate as TIN, which stands for tax identification number, or EIN, which stands for employer identification number. And we use that TIN or EIN to confirm that the organization is listed in IRS Publication 78. And we also use GuideStar in order to request information about the organization to see their 990 and basically check to make sure that they're in good standing with the IRS. Now for parent organizations or group exemptions, such as a charity that has a group exemption underneath a larger umbrella charity, we would need information about those organizations or group exemptions as well. Here is a quick overview of what the information we need on our charitable gift recommendation form. Very similar to our old disbursement request form, meaning we need to know who we're sending the funds to, where we're sending the funds, the name of your donor advised fund or fiscally sponsored program and its account number. There's also options about how to process the request or how to send the request. We have FedEx, which is an overnight option, priority mail, wire, or even regular mail. And you can also send the check to a different address or to the payee. And as I touched on earlier, we do need some charitable substantiation, meaning we need to understand why the gift was requested by the donor advised fund or the program, basically what the purpose of the gift, how the organization was selected, how the gift furthers the purpose of the donor advised fund or the program, and any other information you'd like us to consider. And that's the form that you would submit in order to send a gift to a U.S.-based 501c3 or charity. Now for gifts to churches, most churches do not need to file for 501c3 status, but some do. If it's a 501c3, we can just use the previous form and information, just a copy of their TIN or IRS determination letter. But if there is no IRS designation, we do need to substantiate that it is in fact a church. And there's various criteria that we need to have in order to make sure that that is in fact a church and is able to be donated to as a church underneath IRS regulation. So that criteria is that it needs to have legal existence and a religious history. There needs to be a formal doctrine, discipline, creed, and form of worship. It needs to be led by an ordained minister or a religious figure in charge that has been educated in some sort of manner that's in relation to the religion. So perhaps theological school or ordaining through a educational college of some sort. Religious place of worship for regular congregations and religious activities. And we also use the church integrated auxiliaries that are lumped into churches, meaning a youth or a men and women's organization that falls underneath that church and its stature. Now for gifts to governmental institutions, those are fairly easy. Now a government institution could be a federal government or department, a state government, a county government, city, or even a public school within that city. And all that requires is written confirmation that in fact that department or institution is part of, let's say, the city government. So an example would be a fire department or a Parks and Rec department or even a public school in a city or in a county. Now we're going to talk about international grants, which I know a lot of you are interested in finding out about because this is a large departure from what we have done in the past. And again, these changes have been made because of the tightening of the regulations, as well as the work and effort that UCP will have to do in order to maintain oversight over these donations and make sure that everything is being handled in the proper manner. So we're going to talk about NGOs, which stands for a non-governmental organization, charitable equivalency, and expenditure responsibility. And both of those things, charitable equivalency and expenditure responsibility, are the criteria that we use to determine whether a donation can be made to an NGO or a foreign charity. So for international giving, we do require that the funds be sent to an NGO, and again, an NGO stands for non-governmental organization. We use the term NGO because there are various terms in other countries, department, ministry, that stand for the word charity. So NGO is just the overall reaching term that we're going to use in order to kind of take the place of a U.S. 501c3 charity in the United States, but rather a charity outside of our borders. And the vetting of an NGO is required when goods, services, or funds are sent overseas. And a vetting of an NGO means that we want to make sure that the charity is a legal entity. It was formed in the correct manner. There's dissolution in the correct manner. Let's say that the funds were sent overseas. We want to make sure that they're not funding terrorist activities. So the vetting process is a long process. It's something that UCP does on behalf of our programs, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But it does need to happen whenever goods, let's say an example of a container of medical equipment or services. Let's say you want to send a contingent of youth or young adults over to do any kind of mission trip, or in funds, let's say a donation of $10,000, you want to send that overseas. And for the vetting process, we use a combination of expenditure responsibility and charitable equivalency to determine whether the NGO is grant-worthy. Now, for charitable equivalency, we want to confirm that the NGO is equivalent to a 501c3 public charity. And that's essentially it. There's a number of other criteria that we have to go through. Basically, it's a checklist of information that we need to have and understand about the organization. But in a very basic manner, we want to make sure that the NGO is equivalent to what a 501c3 in the United States is. And for expenditure responsibility, we want to ensure that the grant funds are used properly and according to the grant parameters. We don't want the funds to be paying for, let's say, CEO salaries, or to fund or line the pockets of NGO staff. We want to make sure that the funds are actually being used to, let's say, feed the hungry, or create a well, or build a community center. And we do that all through various forms that we have. The first form that would need to be filled out is the foreign grant application form. And the foreign grant application form is what we use to determine whether the grant can be made to an NGO or not. So we're going to first talk about charitable equivalency. On the foreign grant application form, we also require that confirmation of the grant that will not violate any government orders, legislation, or regulations, meaning that we're not going to fund any terrorist activities or other kind of orders or legislations that would make it impossible for us to give the grant. We would need the charitable organization's registration documents showing that they are, in fact, a legal entity. We would need documentation of the charitable mission, bylaws, key staff, and ensure that they have expenditure tracking that enables them to collect the funds as well as track on how those funds are spent. Now, for the charitable kind of substantiation or charitable equivalency test for the NGO, we want to make sure that they are formed in the correct manner, that, let's say, if the funds were sent over, that be used in the correct manner, as well as if the NGO was ever to dissolve, we want to make sure that the funds are not spent in an inappropriate way, meaning that let's say, the individual in charge of the NGO could just take the funds. Instead, we want to make sure that they're used in a charitable purpose from us to them, or it's sent back to us, and that would all be determined in the grant parameters. Now, for expenditure responsibility, We use this to make sure that the funds are being sent over that are going to be used properly, as well as the reporting of those funds and how they're used. So we would need to understand the planned usage of the funds, and we would need to have a budget for that. We would want to identify key staff members that we're going to communicate with UCP regularly. There is a grant usage report that would need to be used when every quarter when funds are used from the grant. And there's a signed agreement on the application and the quarterly grant usage report on the usage of the funds, reporting requirements, restrictions, and things like that. And for the grant usage report, we want to have an understanding of what funds have been used, what progress has been made, and any proof of major expenses. We're not going to need, let's say, a receipt from the post office for 10 cents worth of stamps. We're going to need to see, let's say, if you perhaps bought an X-ray machine for a hospital, or if you're building a community center, the major expenses related to that. And here is the foreign grant application form. It is quite lengthy. I understand that some of you are looking at this for the first time and see nothing but words, but it is the information that we need to have in order to determine the grant worthiness of the NGO. We need to know things like what the NGO's mission statement, how they're going to use the funds, the timeline, how they're going to track outcomes, key staff members, their experience, how the funding will help, who the funding will help, and how will the grant be monitored in terms of measuring the success of the grant and the program and the NGO's partnership. Now this form is going to be used in combination with the two other grant usage report and the recommendation form for sending the funds overseas. But this is the form that we're going to use to vet the charity, meaning to make sure that it is an NGO and it is worthy of the grants and the funds that we're going to send overseas from our programs and our donor-advised funds. Now, when we are in the next week or so, we are planning on putting together a pamphlet for NGOs when they want to receive funds from a program or a donor-advised fund with us, and because we want to make this as easy as possible. Again, we don't want to make this too unduly burdensome on our program managers or donor-advised fund advisors, and we also don't want to make this too unduly burdensome on the NGOs that are receiving the funds. So we're going to put together a kind of a booklet or a pamphlet on telling them exactly how to send the information to us, what exactly we need. I envision having a checklist on that pamphlet or booklet showing them exactly what they need to send over, as well as provide them a timeline on how we work with that vetting process. Now, for requesting funds to send to an NGO that has been approved, we would use the foreign grant request form. Now, for vetting of a charity by a UCP, the cost is $3.99, and that vetting process is going to be good for 1 year. It can take up to 30 days to complete, and that cost is going to cover the research by UCP staff, the compiling of documents, the substantiation of charitable registration, and all the other things that we need to do to make sure that that grant or that NGO is given in a proper manner and in a charitable manner, and that the NGO is worthy of the funds that we're sending over there. Now, I do understand that that number is high, and we are bringing this number on everyone because it is a new policy. $3.99 is the lowest that we could go in order to maintain staff time and the effort that it's going to take to do the vetting process. We did approach other organizations to see how they're handling the situation. We've had talks with other other U.S.-based charities that send money overseas, and the cost could be anywhere up to $1,900. So although $3.99 does seem high to some of you right now, it is a lot lower than industry standards, and it is going to assist UCP in making sure that all funds sent overseas are used appropriately and are sent to an organization that's worthy of your time and effort in supporting. Now, each time a grant is sent overseas, the cost will be $50, and that's going to cover the cost of expenditure responsibility. The $3.99 will cover the cost of a charitable equivalency, making sure that that NGO is properly vetted, and then the $50 will cover the cost of the equivalency, the expenditure responsibility requirement, making sure that the reporting is done. We're receiving collection of receipts. We're receiving communications. We're staying on top of every single cent that's sent over and making sure that it's used in a charitable manner. Now, since this is a new policy and it will affect a lot of our programs that are already doing good works overseas, there will be no cost in 2013 for NGOs that have already received funds, meaning we'll go through the vetting process, but there won't be a charge. But starting in 2014, we will need to vet each charity that we're going to send funds to that is located overseas. Here is a copy of a foreign grant request form, very similar to the one that we looked at earlier for the domestic grants. We're going to need information about where the charity is located, how the funds will be sent. Typically, when a NGO is going to be receiving funds, they do request that it's sent over wire, just because of mailing checks over may not be received by the NGO. How much the grant will be, any memo you'd like on a check if you do in fact want a check. And then we want information about how you know of the charity's work, how does it further the purpose of your donor advised fund or program, and if you've ever visited the charity overseas, and if you have, then when, and if you haven't, then when do you have any plans to visit the charity? Any other information that you'd like us to consider in making the grant to the NGO. Now, there are other organizations that we haven't talked about, things like social welfare organizations or veteran organizations. And we do approve those on a case-by-case basis. And these are organizations that are not registered as 501c3s. These can even be ministries that aren't underneath a church. We do need information on the planned usage of the funds, the structure of the organization, organizational documentation showing that they are in fact registered perhaps in their city or their state, and any restrictions or prohibitions on how the funds are used. Meaning if we're going to give funds to a fraternal organization or a state-level nonprofit, we want to make sure that the funds are used in a charitable manner. And I did want to talk about operations overseas. As many of you know, our programs are located in the United States and have a U.S. address. And if a program wants to operate overseas, it needs to partner with an NGO that handles that operation. And that partnership could be anything from goods, services, or funds being sent overseas to conduct a program or a project. When we do allow programs to have mission travel or trips overseas, but those mission trips or travel would need to have a 3-month limit to that trip. Otherwise, that program would be operating overseas and would need to do so in partnership with an NGO that is registered and vetted by UCP. Now, for the submission of these forms that we've talked about, you could fax it into us at 703-820-5100. You can mail the form to us at 6201 Leesburg Pike, Suite 405, Falls Church, Virginia, 22044. And you could email these forms directly to any staff member that you already have an email address for, or you can email it to info@unitedcp.org. And we do request that you include all the necessary forms and documentation. Basically, the more that you can send to us at one time, the faster that we're able to process your request. Incomplete submissions does slow down our ability to respond in a timely manner. And here is a copy of our domestic international wire form. And I present this to you to show you that we can wire internationally, and there is a form that we collect that information, things like SWIFT code or ABA codes, to make sure that the funds are sent to the appropriate NGO. And you can also use this form when sending funds domestically to, let's say, a 501c3 or to a church. And now I'm sure many of you have some questions for me. I would be happy to answer them, and I think Stephanie's going to read them off to you in a moment. Again, my name is Katie Kern. I'm the Director of Program Administration here. And you can contact me directly at 703-538-8867, or you can email me at katie@unitedcp.org. Stephanie, do you have some questions for us?
Thank you so much for that, Katie. Yes, we do have a few questions here from some of our viewers. Okay, let's look at the first one here. Is it going to be $3.99 every year?
Yes, it will be $3.99 every year that you want to send funds overseas to an NGO. Many fiscal sponsors or community foundations or donor advised funds don't offer the ability to send funds overseas because it's so difficult to understand the intricacies of sending funds overseas, the reporting requirements, the vetting process. And the organizations that do allow these funds to send overseas, there's usually a large fee in relation to that. I understand that $3.99 is not in a lot of our programs' budgets already, but it does need to be accounted for because that fee will be assessed each year that you want to send funds to an NGO. So it would be 1 year. So if you sent funds in January 2014, that vetting would be good until January 2015.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are all UCP programs to be U.S. projects only?
Yes, UCP programs are based in the United States and their operations are in the United States. We do have programs that choose to partner with NGOs or have projects or programs overseas like mission trips or perhaps helping or assisting in building a well or a dam. And these programs do partner with NGOs. We don't have programs that operate overseas. And when they do partner with NGOs overseas, that's not their main focus. They do have to have activities. They do have to have fundraising efforts. They do have to have charitable purpose in the United States as well. So they're not 100% working outside the United States. They do need to have U.S.-based operations.
Okay. The next question is, can we start sending documents for the vetting of the NGO now, even if we are already sending funds this year for this NGO?
Yes, you can definitely go ahead and start sending your documentation in right now. We would keep a file on that NGO and just add everything to it in order to do that vetting process. It's up to you if you want to go ahead and start sending that information into us now or you want to wait until it's required for that vetting process. So whatever would be easiest on you.
Okay, the next question is, when you say that you're vetting the NGO, are you contacting them personally, or are you just reviewing the information that we give you?
Well, we will be reviewing information that you provide to us, but it's a more collaborative effort between UCP and the organization. We are going to be contacting them directly. We're going to try to Skype them or perhaps Google Hangout, as well as via phone call and email. And we're going to require that the organization be able to maintain that communication process with us, provide the documentation to us. Basically, we're going to make sure that the organization is worthy of the funds that you want to send over there, as well as make sure that they are, in fact, an organization that is registered with the government. They have the proper bylaws and articles of incorporation. They have a board of directors. They're able to track expenditures. There's many other kind of checkpoints that we have to make sure that the organization is going to be worthy of the grant that we send overseas, and that vetting process is going to take some time, anywhere up to 30 days for us to complete, or maybe even longer, depending on how well the organization works with us and responds to our request for information.
Okay. What if the NGO's documentation is in another language?
We do require that the information is translated into English. Unfortunately, we don't have a translator on staff. I have been able to translate things on different websites, but it would be easiest and we would be able to respond in a more timely manner if the information that is presented to us is translated into English. And our forms do need to be filled out in English.
Okay, it looks like we have one more question here. Am I understanding correctly that we have to pay $3.99 each year for each NGO we partner with?
Yes, you are understanding that correctly. And I know this comes to surprise to many of our programs. And again, we did not want to make this too unduly burdensome. We tried to find the most cost-effective way to enable our programs to maintain giving overseas A lot of organizations are choosing just to not give overseas in order to avoid the kind of the headache that comes along with foreign gifting. And that $399 is going to cover the cost of UCP vetting that charity. And unfortunately, that is a cost that's going to be incurred every year for every charity that you would like to send donations to. Like I said earlier in the presentation, we've looked at other industry kind of competitors that are doing the same thing. We're sending funds overseas, and those costs could be anywhere up to $1,900 to vet a charity. So I do understand your concerns, and I'd be happy to talk to you about them, but it is a fee that's going to be incurred on each NGO every year.
All right, thank you so much for answering those questions, Katie. It looks like that's all the questions we have at this moment. But again, if any of you guys have any more additional questions, you can go ahead and email Katie at unitedcp.org, or you can email me, Stephanie, that's with a PH, at unitedcp.org. And again, I just want to remind everyone that today's webinar is recorded and will be up on our website under our resources tab sometime next week. If you visit our website and you go to the resources tab, you can also find past webinars, various educational presentations such as how to get started with your program at UCP, which reviews our policies, procedures, and forms, as well as a guide to hosting an event or fundraiser. So again, I just want to thank everyone today and have a great day. Thank you.